So, yeah, I'm going to talk about the 28ers Amendment. Now, we had a kitchen sink version of this. So, and I often talk about, especially with Occupy Riverside when it first started, many of the Occupy sites first started, people came up with big wounds, personal, financial, ecological, all kinds of issues in dealing with environment, global warming, equal rights amendments. These kinds of things are all permeate our culture. And so everyone would show up to an Occupy event, and they would come carrying this very important fetish doll. And it was their issue, and it mattered more than anybody else's issue. And that is an important thing, and that was something that was part of the 60s movements, was an identity of different and disparate forms of oppression, that we're in this huge chain system of different forms of discrimination. And the mistake of the 1960s, and the mistake to some degree, although I still consider myself an occupier, is that that to not look at the structural components about how all of these are affected. Right? You can talk about hierarchy and how it affects human behavior, especially when it's illegitimate forms of power. But when you look at the funding mechanism, almost every issue you care about, or an issue that you might care about more than others, affects and distorts the role of democracy, right? And it subverts it. And I'd ask you this, why is it that the worst aspects of American society have the best lobbyists? Why is it that the worst aspects of American society have the best lobbyists? Why is the FBI and CIA budget 500 times more than the Department of Education? Why is it that speculating on real estate is more important than making sure that you go to school for a reasonable price, and maybe even for free, right? In some places in Scandinavia, that is free. That is not that is an accepted component, that you build up the future and that you don't create punishment culture. So right now in the United States, this amendment is trying to address punishment cultures and to subvert those to kind of knowledge-based, sharing, collaborative cultures, where we're looking at things in terms of how we can sustain and create a vibrant democracy for the 21st century. And even we know when we were talking about the amendment how loaded democracy is and is weighted down by lots of other conceptions. And before I want to get into the amendment, I want to mention, of course, that Howard Zinn talks about this in much of his work, how the United States was never, its true intentions were never that of a democracy. It's called a republic. We tend to dump in the word democracy because it sounds nice and it's good for rallies, but it's actually a republic. It was never meant to be a true democracy because James Madison and others, as Howard Zinn and Noam Chomsky mentions, they were worried about indentured white servants combining forces with blacks that were slaves, forming a coalition to overthrow the land-bearing class. And that's what Bacon's revolt was all about, was allowing white people to beat up or kill innocent black slaves for any reason without any legal precedents or legal corrections. They're free to do whatever they want. So it reinscripted a kind of hierarchy. So the United States is bound up with certainly better modes of representation, but it's not truly a democracy. This amendment is going to create a pathway to a 21st century democracy. There's, like as Elizabeth mentioned, there are 16 other amendments that are around. All of them don't go nearly far enough. There's some that, like Dennis Kucinich or Move to Men, certainly make headways. So these sections that I'm going to look at, well, they have a big one in the first part, Section 1. And Section 1, and this is the title because I want to be clear that this is an amendment that's meant to be broad in terms of its outreach. In order to pass an amendment like this, we have to either go through the Congress, or we actually have to go through a grassroots struggle through the state system. We're going to take the harder and more interesting and more inspiring road of having this pass through 2/3 of the states of the United States of America.
Yeah.
Because what better way to claim democracy than have a grassroots struggle nationally to allow this to occur? So we have a certain methodology. We're hoping, and what we're thinking, possibly 2016 to have a national convention and bring every activist that has issues, that worried about healthcare, education, pharmaceutical industry, worried about lobbying and banking and real estate, worried about the military-industrial complex, worried about these very powerful punishment industries that are subverting the role of democracy. We're going to hope to have a convention to push this up for national conversation. And this will scare the shit out of people because this is focused. This is a solution-based movement, and it has a clear goal, and it's very scary for the media and, of course, invested interests, wealthy vested interests, because it immediately attacks the source of the system. It goes to the core element. So the first section, and this is the first section, could be considered controversial. And I want to talk about that that we're calling it severing forever the INC from the USG. And I've talked about this with my students. There are several different civic stances to discuss libertarianism, conservatism, liberalism, and anarchism. But all of them question power to certain degrees or levels, right? And what we do know is it's very hard to imagine a life without a corporation, and it's very hard to imagine a life without a state, although personally I would like to have neither of them. We have to work at separating them. We have to at least work at separating so they don't collude together as a concentrated power. What you have now is corporations merging with the government, and much in the same way that Soviet Union was this giant concentrated state-planned economy. So they're planning together in this concentrated fashion. So the First Amendment is the most radical one in some ways, and also the most difficult to quantify, is creating a new branch of government. So Section 1, creating a branch like the FEC with T, so the Federal Exchange Communications Division, which is supposed to prosecute, sue, and prevent and mergers from occurring, and of course watching, I'm sorry, what?
Federal Election Commission.
Oh, Federal Election Commission, I'm sorry, I was thinking the Financial Commission. But the Federal Election Commission, which is supposed to control and make sure that that's happening. This amendment hereby creates a branch with the authority to ensure equal access to the election process, oversee federal elections, disperse all election funds to qualified candidates, and enforce all ensuing sections of this amendment. The structuring of this branch shall consist of the Secretary and 2 representatives from each state who shall be elected to a 4-year term by popular vote every 2 years. And we're thinking in terms of the Attorney General system as an example of that, where you have state representatives and then an Attorney General. The difference between this is, of course, this will involve much more direct forms of democracy. The Supreme Court shall preside over all impeachments of elected officials in this branch. All members of the public shall have free and equal access to all documents from this branch. So it'll be complete transparency on all the elected issues. It means that the branch itself has checks and balances by the Supreme Court, which we were concerned about. We didn't want this to be some Spanish empire that would take over the entire U.S. We wanted to make sure that it had its own checks and balances uniquely, but we also wanted to be its own separate building with its own funding and its own ability to kick some serious ass. From the passage of this amendment, all citizens are granted equal access. From the passage of the amendment, all citizens are granted equal access to federal politicians. The branch is required to oversee, audit, and allow exceptions based on a rigorous rubric. Paid lobbying, paid consultation, and paid advocacy for nonprofit or for-profit entities toward federally elected politicians is banned henceforth. This is a big deal. What often happens is not just the money that flows into the campaigns, and Elizabeth talked about to some degree. It's the actual writing of the legislation. It's the very fact that the Visa credit card bankruptcy laws that were formed with the tailoring and the handiwork of Visa credit card lobbyists on the floor. And this is an important point. And it affects both Republican and Democratic forms of democracy, and that, for instance, Joseph Biden, which many people don't admit to, his son got a position with Visa credit card after he proposed and supported this bankruptcy law under the years of Bush. So there is a kind of quid pro quo this for that. So we want to eliminate the ability for politicians to come in and say, hey, I'm a for-profit prison industry, I would like to find a way to increase my productivity and my profits. Right, so let me work with you on a quiet meeting somewhere else and manage legislation that's going to work against our democracy. So we're not going to allow for that. And the campaign season begins when the branch allocates campaign funds to qualified candidates. So what this means is, instead of this kind of idea of public financing maybe sometime occasionally, it's public financing for all elected officials. Federal officials include the senators, congressional figures of the House, and also the president, him or herself. So it involves all of them. Congress shall fund the agency to no more than $60 billion pegged to the fiscal year of 2013 and adjusted to inflation. To give you an idea, that is the budget of the FBI. I think this would be a much better use of those resources. We were thinking, oh, to peg it to the Department of Education, but we know it's so woefully small that it wouldn't mean anything. We want to actually be able to fund this. And this is the thing, how much money do you need? We spent $6 billion just on campaign financing. $6 billion this year. We can do an immeasurable amount of good with a much smaller amount of money, because the money that's often used for campaigns is for voters that don't give a shit, that aren't paying attention, that know the system is rigged, and that know that whatever happens, their voice is never going to be heard. We're going to change that system entirely. Congress shall fund the agency to no more than $60 billion, and I talked about that. Subsequently, the agency shall be funded each year under the supervision of the branch secretary, who should be required to provide Congress an annual budget. So it's that person's budget, it's her budget, she shows it to the boys, right? She shows them that this is the budget and it's not to be played with. It's a separate branch, a separate building, separate funding. It cannot be manipulated from outside forces, which is of course something that we're greatly concerned about because we don't trust legislators, right, with this. And this is why this is in print. The principal officer shall be paid equal to the salary of a member of House of Representatives. No employee of the branch shall be paid more than the principal officers. This branch shall have the authority to enforce the provisions of this article in federal courts, whose authority shall extend to actions by the branch against the Congress and the executive branch. This branch has the right to bring lawsuits against any violation of any election law. The Supreme Court shall have final jurisdiction. So once again, the check and balance. Like, hey, we're building a branch, but we're aware that it has to have limits. Section 2, corporations are not voters. They don't dance, cry, dream, or even breathe. This is the heart of the element. This is a big area of debate for us when we were forming it. And it's important to remember that we had 12 different sections in this. We called it the kitchen sink amendment. And that's ultimately what it ended up being, is a kitchen sink amendment, where we had a lot of great ideas and we didn't know if they would order or pull over to sides that would include a libertarian, conservative, and liberal values as well. So we wanted to try to keep an open parachute. So in order to not necessarily avoid the question, but to get beyond it, we wanted to say whether or not corporations are deemed to have personhood. Congress and states shall have exclusively restrict campaign financing to public funding. The public funding does not extend to persons, citizens, for-profit or non-profit corporations, NGOs, or limited liability companies. So we personally don't think corporations are people. We just don't think it. Doesn't seem like it, doesn't sound like a good idea, and we want to reverse that. Although we don't want to create another level of argumentation that will block out what we're really trying to do, which is just create a permanent system of public financing where no outside money is involved. So we're including not just for-profit and non-profit, which was a bit of a tense thing in our group because some of us work for very good non-profits, but others had to remind these same people that non-profits are also the Fed, Chamber of Commerce, think tanks that may be doing immeasurable harm to society and clouding the vision and democracy and the debate that goes on in the United States. So we want to level the playing field, and it's important to acknowledge that. There's an interesting story about how this can be communicated, about corporations not being people and leveling the playing field. I went to get some paper plates for the event at the 99-cent store, and a guy asked me, I had pink and blue plates, and he asked me, is it a boy's birthday or a girl's birthday? Because he was nervous about it. And I said, no, it's for an event on campus. He said, oh, what is it about? He's at the 99-cent store, there's not a lot going on for him. And so I talked to him, and he's a young kid, maybe 19, 20, white kid, young, 19, 20. And I asked him, like, what is this about? He said, oh, we're trying to create a constitutional amendment to ban money in politics. And he goes, oh, okay. And I said, this includes lobbyist corporations so that we have only public financing elections. And they said, well, I identifies his own political persuasion. He said, well, would teacher unions be blocked out of that? And I said, absolutely. All of them would be blocked out of this. It would only be citizens that would have access, not organizations or nonprofit or profit organizations. He's like, oh, that makes sense. Minute and a half. Explained it in a minute and a half. I could not do that with Occupy Riverside. I couldn't explain it in a minute and a half. So if I could talk to this guy at a 90-cent store and communicate in a minute and a half going through the register, there's a big problem, a big fucking problem. We can communicate that. People are aware of it. When you see polling data, people know the game is rigged, that the same circular wealth circle jerk goes on. Someone's a lobbyist, someone's a politician, someone's a lobbyist, someone's a politician. They retire, they go back, they lobby again. So it's a circle that we have to end. And so leveling the playing field is a key component. So yes, there are institutions that we do like personally, there's other institutions that other people like, but we really care about the unique values and rights of the human being that is an American citizen. Section 3, money is not speech. Federal, state, and local governments have the right to regulate, limit, and prohibit contributions and expenditures from either a candidate's own wealth and expenditures or any organization of a natural person whose aims are to influence in any way the election of candidates for public office in any stated ballot measure. Now, there might be some students here who are Ron Paul fans. There's some nice things about what Ron Paul said about corporations not accepting donations, but there's also something called bundlers. So private people can donate as much money. We think that is deeply unethical and unfair because it silences a whole mass of voters that don't have money and don't have access to use that money, and it enlarges the scope and loudness and volume of other types of people's participation. So freedom, for me, and my personal spiritual belief, is not a concept of individual rights, but it's individual rights that are shared with other individual rights. That's key. And so to acknowledge that, yes, you have a freedom means that I also have a freedom. And when your freedom is expanded, you've taken away some of my freedom, and to the point where it's tyranny. Remember, the only person that has absolute freedom is a tyrant, is a dictator. They have absolute tyranny. That is not freedom anymore. Section 4 is public financing. Required public financing for all federal elections, all campaigns for the United States presidency, members of U.S. House of Representatives, and Senate positions shall be exclusively financed from funds that are generated, allocated, and audited by the branch created by Article 1, right? Article 1 is the thing where all things flow from it. It's the river. No campaign funds shall be permitted to any federal candidate from any other source, including the candidate. So once again, the idea that money is blocked out of the system. That the money that we're using is actually the part way the financing of the campaigns and also the management of the auditing system with this branch, this fourth branch, which we have not named. Maybe you have an idea for that. So once again, blocking out, and creating an actual equal access for people. And so someone that's wealthy, this is a key moment in this, I didn't talk about this, is the fact that you do not have to be wealthy to run in politics. This will make a custodian, a carpenter, this will make an astronaut and an architect, all able to run for office. You know, as often is said, you know, why do they all tend to be lawyers and doctors and lobbyists, right? This is a problem. This is not a truly representative system when over 50% of Congress are in the top 1% of income. So we want to allow for the rights of people to say, hey, I have my community support, my community supports me, and as a result of that, this is key in here, this is the key sequence, is the money is connected to the people that support you. So in essence, if I'm going to get elected, I have to get support from my local community, my participants, my precinct, my state, and in order to get that funding, I have to have a viable connection to the people that I represent. Not only that, but to get refunded for the next campaign, I can't be a hypocrite. Because what actually happens is not the institution of power that makes hypocrisy, it's the institution themselves, the campaign financing, where money is over here and people are over here. And the money ends up subverting all the campaign promises because you have to do the payback, the quid pro quo, this for that. And so we want to end that system where the money and the people are connected together. Let's see. Section 5. These are the kind of fun, exciting things that we can talk about and make jokes about. They're fun and they're exciting. This was an idea that I came up with from an NPR interview from someone, believe it or not, from the American Enterprise Institute that talked about how popular lotteries are. And instead of creating a punishment system where we try to encourage people by punishing them, which in Australia I think is a $50 fine if you do not vote in Australia. We don't want to do punishment, we want to celebrate people's right to vote. So we're going to create a party in the United States pants. And we're going to make it possible to actually win some money from the US government. And I'll explain what this happens. So this is called Willy Wonka's Golden Ticket. During federal election day, each natural citizen who casts a ballot will be granted one lottery number automatically entered into a pool from which 50 numbers per state will be selected to win $100,000. These funds, this is what's really the kicker, these funds will come from the budget of the congressional salary and be adjusted for inflation. So it'll come from congressional pay. And these winnings, of course, we all love this, so I'm playing into it, it's tax-free, right, which we all love to hear. So this is, so basically 50 people from 50 states will each get them. And then what this will do is, it'll give people money, but it won't choke them off from the rest of society. They can do good things with it, but it won't corrupt them and their families. And also, we could be on the TV talking about who are the winners in your state. So it's a lottery, but it's connected to politics. And it encourages everybody to vote. because of the idea of the lottery and the celebrations of that. And then not only that, not only are we going to have a lottery, not only are we going to have celebrations about a return to a one vote, one voice democracy, we're going to have a national day of democracy. It's going to be a federal holiday. We're going to allow people to vote and have time off from work. This is a common sense idea that you can see in several, what are all sometimes called first world nations, but is also known as Europe. They have days off to vote. We don't need to reduce the pressure or increase the pressure on people that cannot vote, that have jobs, that can't take time off work. We would like this to be a federally paid holiday, if we could, for every citizen, except for emergency staff and people that we need for security devices. But we'll start off with a federal national holiday. From the Passages Amendment, the second Tuesday of November is hereby made a federal holiday as official voting day for each national election. This national day of observance will celebrate a one vote, one voice democracy. So that's key. That's the criteria of this. So we have some fun things in here. We have some not so fun things here. But if you stay with this and you read this document, spend time with it, and think about it, you'll find that this will be the #1 thing that can be accomplished in our lifetime. The founding of the United States, one of the key principles was, once again, the separation of powers, checks and balances. Right? We had a medieval age, you might have heard of it in Europe, and where religion and the state were combined as one mega force. So what's happened now is we have an emergent crisis with two large forces, corporate power and government power, that are now merging in ways that are hard to imagine. And I think the Founding Fathers would be horrified by this. And in fact, you can find quotes on Facebook that talk about this emergent power of corporations. In fact, to give you an idea, and this will play into some of your own beliefs, is that the largest economies in the world, of the 100 largest economies in the world, 51 of them are corporations. That's 51. That means that they're larger, and in fact, they have more powers because they can move and slide and move against each state and lower wages, lower rights, lower ethical rights, lower ecological sustainability. So they can kind of move to the bottom. So it's a race to the bottom, essentially. That's not to say that government's not a corrupting influence. So for people that identify as a libertarian or conservative, we agree with you. The government can be a corrupting influence. What we're saying is, look, it's both of them, not one of them. And the fact that they're together is the problem. Okay? Thank you so much.